test.
Which I'm glad because after homeschooling a lot longer.
Good evening. Welcome to Growing Through Loss. This is our 4th program in the fall series. My name is Susan Amos Palmer. I'm director of the program. I will do an opening and then introduce our speaker. The book I'm using for the opening, it's Praying Our Goodbyes with Joyce by Joyce Rupp. The reading I selected in here is called The Ache of Autumn in Us. There is a season for everything, a time for giving birth, a time for dying, a time for tears, a time for laughter, a time for mourning, a time for dancing, from Ecclesiastes. The trees grow more restless, October wind weaves through them. They shake their arms in dismay as if to fight the coming cold and the grief of leaves going. Autumn air does a heart dance of branches already gone bearing. The misty air clings to golden leaves, making the trees bend even more. It is a season to hold the trees close, to stand with them in their grieving. It is a time to open my inner being to the misty truth of my own goodbyes. Autumn comes, it always does. Goodbye comes, it always does. The trees struggle with this truth today, and in my deepest of being, so do I. Every autumn, nostalgia fills me. Every autumn, yearning holds me. I cling to the ripeness of summer, knowing it will be many long months before I can catch a breath of lilac or the green of freshly mown grass. And so I begin my fallow vigil. Remember the truth of the ages. Unless the wheat seed dies, it cannot sing a new birth. Unless summer gives into autumn, springtime will never embrace me. Our speaker tonight is Deacon Joe Frederick, who is a retired social worker and deacon at the Church of St. Timothy in Blaine. He and his wife, Therese, have been married for 46 years. They have 3 adult sons, 2 daughters-in-law, and a granddaughter. Joe was born in Minneapolis, raised in Excelsior. He completed 12 years of Catholic schooling, holds a BS from Metropolitan State University, and an MSW from St. Catherine's University. Ordained a permanent deacon in 1995, he has served as St. Peter's Church in Delano, the Basilica of St. Mary's, and Ascension in North Minneapolis. He is presently assigned to St. Timothy's in Blaine. His emphasis has been on marriage and baptismal preparation and prison ministry. An LGSW social worker, he spent his career in hospice care as both a social worker and a chaplain. Previously, he owned an alarm company. He is a musician and songwriter, playing in 4 different bands. He is here tonight to share with us his thoughts on living with grief. Please welcome Deacon Joe Frederick.
Thank you, Susan. How are you doing? And you can hear okay? All right. And can you see this? I've got a PowerPoint kind of a thing. I'm going to try to use it. It's a little bit far away from some of you, I know. But it should be also duplicated on the paper that you have, those handouts. So if you can't see it, you should be able to catch it on the paper. But I'll point it out as we go. As Sue said, I'm a social worker, retired, but you never really grow out of social work. It's imprinted in your DNA after a few years. So I have a different perspective on most things, and it's called the strengths perspective, in that sense that I tend to help and look for the strengths that are alive and well with people. So I do this in prison ministry, and I did hospice, and I do it with couple therapy and such. And that's a little bit different than I call it the medical model, which is diagnosing a malady, putting together some kind of a repair, if you will. It works well in hospice. It works well working with people who are dealing with critical loss or big losses in life. Resilience is what I'm going to be talking about, and that's living with grief. Not after grief, not before, but moving forward in life with grief. And healthy, as well as the maladaptive kinds of things that we hear about and see that happen. So I'm going to be talking in that regard. But really, the takeaway, if it's anything at all, will be this resilience that each one of us has, that was authored by your parents, along with the Creator of the universe, along with God. God wrote you into existence. Your parents were allowed to step in and co-create with God. So that piece that God wrote, that part of you, the part of you that's God-sponsored, God-authored, I envision it as a golden thread that runs through the center of every person. What God placed there, what God intended for you. God does not make mistakes. God loves each and every one of you. And I believe in life we get busy, we forget about this golden thread, if you will, and get busy about life and things are occurring. One of the challenges in life, I think for anybody, is to rediscover or find that golden thread that God wrote, that piece of you that was written by God when you were created, and then amplify that. And let other things kind of fall secondary to that reality. Your strength then is found rooted in what? God, the Creator. And you cannot go wrong with that. And God does not leave us orphaned. And God has nothing planned but blessings for each and every one of us. Even if we're walking through tough times. So that's the resiliency that I'm talking about. That's a piece that establishes your dignity in God's creation. God created you. You are here. You are alive. And God is looking at you with love. The other thing is coming together as you do is probably still one of the greatest things that you can do for living with grief. Coming together and sharing your stories as you do in group in a little while, supporting each other, and just validating each other as you're moving through things, as the grief unfolds, as it moves through. That's still one of the best things you can do. Still one of the best things you can do. There's a lot of research out on bereavement, coping strategies and such. The research isn't done. They don't have efficacy on a lot of this yet because they just don't know it. It's subjective. It's very hard to put metrics on it to find out if it's really effective. But what they do know is that most of us will move through grief in kind of predictable ways, things we hear about, right, and read in the books. And like a cloud that comes across the sky, it will, at some point, someday, move on. And you'll be back in the sunshine, living with the history, living with grief. Nothing goes away. We don't try to dispense with or argue away or cover up. But we learn to live and move forward with it. In the light of day, the clouds will move on. That's the good news that God promises us in several places. I would like to, Susan started us with a prayer, but I would like to move us through another just a small reflection prayer. It has to do much more with the seasons right now. You probably noticed I did in my house today, the leaves are just beautiful. I mean, the wind is kind of going to take care of it quickly here. My house is like glowing yellow. The whole neighborhood is. I don't know what trees those are, but they're just beautiful. And I've got a couple of maples, so they're on fire with red and orange. And it's quite lovely. I just have a reflection for us on that. We praise you, God. This will be your part. Can you read that from here? These lines?
No.
If not, that's okay. I'll say it for you. This one is, I believe, not on your paperwork. We praise you, Lord, for autumn, for falling temperatures and morning chill. Trees turn gold, red, brown, orange. Falling leaves, blowing leaves. The smell of burning leaves. The joy of leaf pile jumping. May the crunch of the leaves beneath our feet remind us of the brevity of this earthly life. We praise you, Lord, for autumn, the interplay of outside temperatures and inside warmth, the promise of cider and pumpkin bread, the blessing of blankets and sweaters. May the storm of our breath in the cool air remind us that it is you who give us your breath of life. We praise you, Lord, for autumn, the beauty and the hope and the change of the seasons, the promise that is coming with autumn, heralds another ending and beginning, and the wonder of another winter, another spring, another summer yet to come. May the earlier setting of the sun remind us to take time to rest. We praise you, Lord, for the wonders of the natural world, the scurry of the squirrels, the hibernation of the bear, the migration of the bird. May their movements remind us that you call us to follow your will. We bless you, God. We bless you, God of seed God of harvest, and we bless each other in your name. May the beauty of our world, of this world, and the love that created it be expressed through our lives and be a blessing to others now and always. Amen. Resilience. I mentioned that word. It's a noun, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness, resilience, resiliency. The personal qualities that enable one to thrive in the face of adversity. When we talk about living with grief, we talk about a state or a process. Right? It's a process. It's not a state of being. It's not a malady. It's a process. It's a natural, universal response. Common. So for the loss of a loved one. But it's not the state of you. It's not who you are. Important to remember, because these things are transitory. You're more than the sum of all your experiences anyway. We know that. You are much more than that. And of course, I'm going to be always pointing that back to God. Seeing you as God sees you is to remember different things, right? It's a natural psychological response to bereavement. Bereavement, bereave, means to have something taken away, pulled away from us. We lost our job. I lost my mom. I lost my dad. I lost one of my sisters. You've maybe lost a spouse. If it's pulled away, the trauma can be shattered, right? It just grounds us into a different reality for a little time. It's being deprived. It's comprised of feelings, thoughts, behaviors related to the loss, to the deceased one, or the loved one, or the death event itself. These are normal things we hear about in grief and loss, books, and people who speak on it. It's the normal part of the process. Very normal. There's a guide out there for counselors. It's called the DSM, Diagnostic Manual. And there is a new category that they've created. It's called long-term bereavement, which is new. And it's also being very cautioned because, again, it's not a malady. It's nothing, if they treat medically, there's kind of a cautious warning with that. Don't do it, in other words. It's one of the last things you want to do. But it's considered now, and it's with the caution that we warn guys and gals who use the DSM or the ICD-9 not to rush into diagnosing somebody with a long-term bereavement problem. It can be acute. It can climb up on us quickly. If different kinds of grief. Sometimes you've probably seen this. I was trying to meet up with it all. This is kind of what they always throw in the books for the normal process for grief. I think this is on your sheet, on the half sheet towards the bottom, middle. And it's explained and taught in schools and university as a process that can be followed. It's fairly not mundane, but it's fairly logical. You can diagnose somebody to look along this line, find out where they're at, come up with information about it. This is actually my experience, which is the other one, which is this all at the same time kind of business, right? That, we think we're doing all right, then we're just, something comes by us, a smell, a thought, a song, something just pulls us right back. And then we work ourselves mentally, emotionally, sometimes physically, back to a position where we can move ahead again. This pendulum is actually a process that they've identified, a dual model for recovery of deep grief. And it's considered normal again. I want to just say that that is considered a normal process. Going into grief, uncontrolled crying, sadness, and then the next day being able to sit with friends and have a laugh. You're not crazy. This is just a normal process, and that's how that works. It's a Gould model. It's actually considered to be normal. And they're trying to articulate that with further studies. They're not through it yet. There's more to do. Putting a time frame on grief is an inappropriate piece. The DSM, again, tells about this. It's called Medicalizing Grief. If it's quantitatively set, then we can look at it and say it started here, it's going to end here, it's probably 50% chance of success at this point. It's not real. It doesn't work. And there's caution against doing that, of course. It's dangerous, it's simplistic. So we move into things. The first one is called Acute Grief. If you could read it, it says a distressing initial reaction. Acute means it comes on quickly, right? Sometimes we get surprised by things. A dear friend of mine brought his wife for a little bitty work on the lower spine, and she passed away at the table. She died right there. Very young couple. Acute grief. It happens very quickly. It's a shock. It comes up. That comes along with all the things that are normal there. Shock, disbelief, anguish, sadness, anxiety, anger, longing and yearning for the deceased, among other responses. So it's acute, it's fast, it comes on. It's normal, it's what happens. Complicated grief, anticipatory grief, and disenfranchised grief. Anticipatory grief. It's a response to expected loss. I'm just going to give a definition in terms that will help us when we talk about resiliency here. Something that's coming up that might be a loss, and I start to get in anticipated grief. I start to worry about it. I start to make plans as if it's already happened. Got future awfuls, looking ahead. Complicated grief. This is the one that's it's the one that they consider the dangerous one, and it's only because it's complicated. What it means by that is it's just the normal process to living with grief, to be kind of back to a normal, is blocked. It's blocked somehow by something, and that can be a lot, it can be complicated. We pay a lot of attention to it because 12 to 15% of the population that are bereaved, that go through grieving, end up in a complicated bereavement. And it's looked at closely, we check for it all the time, we monitor for it only for this reason. It's important. The people that are caught with that are not crazy, they're not insane, they're not malformed. It's just that they're caught and the normal process has been blocked somewhere by something. Could be old, could be history, could be a youthful thing, all kinds of stuff. But the normal process is to move through it, so it's uncomplicated. That's the normal process. Complicated occurs in the path of integrated grief. Integrated grief is grief that's been reintegrated into your life. Your life from this day forward is going to include some kind of grief. How are we going to handle that? But you'll integrate it. It will be integrated into your life in healthy ways. You'll adapt. Integrated grief is blocked, resulting in a profound and chronic distress associated with the loss. This chronic distress they talk about, this is why it is so important, is really debilitating. It can end relationships and lives. It's bad for the heart. It's hard on your organs. Cortisol raises, goes up off the charts, and it's not healthy. Disenfranchised grief. Disenfranchised grief is one that we can't talk about. For example, I'm a doctor, I'm a medical doctor, I'm making this up. Medical doctor, and people are dying on my watch. I'm trained not to let people die. My job is to make sure that you live. So I'm not allowed. It's disenfranchised. I can't grieve that. It's creating a double bind for me, of course, as a doctor. But it's losses that I cannot cope with. So in hospice, for example, we would work with staff nursing and doctors. We would take them in sessions and let them process their losses because they fell in love with some of these people in a healthy way. They cared for them. These were their patients who were trying to put them back to life or wholeness or healing. And they died on their watch. It happens. They all run through it. So we would come in and help them kind of process through that because they're not allowed to in the professional setting. They just don't go there. It's disenfranchised. You cannot talk about it. Cannot be openly acknowledged, publicly mourned, or socially supported. So they're kind of left alone with their grief. Complicated grief, as I mentioned. It's to be diagnosed with that, to have it so severe that you have to go to a specialist. There's a lot of criteria that they would have to qualify on an individual. It's usually got to go for 12 months running on an adult, 6 months on a child. It's got a lot of characteristics that, once you saw them, there's way too many to go into, but once you saw them, you go, yeah, that's abnormal. They need help. And so they'll walk with, down and through therapy. There's a couple of different therapies that they have developed. Again, therapeutically, the efficaciousness of these, the efficacy is not proven. So we're kind of not making it up, but we're just kind of lumbering through this as best we can. This kind of goes back to, it's just a little history here. Back in the 30s of the last century, social work was a new industry, a new science, and it was without research. It was without proven best practices. Didn't have it. Psychology did, but social work did not. So they got very, very busy with the research and developed, and textbooks eventually started through universities and high schools, became more established with best practices, with evidence-based practice. But one of the things that they excluded as that process was evolving was a pretty key piece: spirituality. It was not included. 90% of Americans consider themselves spiritual. Well, the sciences didn't include that because you can't quantify or qualify in a scientific model, right? So it just was not there. So if I sit down with somebody in clinical counseling and we're talking and I'm ignoring their participation in this church or their spiritual life, am I serving them completely? No. I'm missing a big piece of their life. So the research has started up. It has been going. It's not in the textbooks yet, though. So the colleges and the universities still don't have it. So the graduates of today are picking it up, but they're picking it up tangentially in the science, through conferences and such. But it's one of the key pieces of getting the full counseling degree now, is to have that taken care of. So complicated grief, some of the symptoms: acute, tearfulness, sadness, insomnia. These are things you've heard before. Typically require no treatment. Patients show a preoccupation possibly with the deceased, feeling inner emptiness, no interest in life, and sleeping poorly. These are the things we can identify these in ourselves. There's mourning. It's an outward expression of that grief, including cultural and religious customs surrounding the death. Each culture is a little bit different how it considers death to move forward. Bereavement, I explained, is that period of grief. It's a short period for a while of mourning after loss. And then this is other grief they've got identified now. It's called takasubo, which is the actual heart, left ventricle, getting involved with failure due to grief, excessive grief. The only reason I bring these up is because I'm just trying to point out the shadow side of staying with grief, and to be aware of that is to move forward, to find how you can integrate your grief back into your life. Your life. So it's finding that golden thread, if you will, then. It looks like an eternity, but it's a short trip. Enjoy life. Be kind. Right? If they can look back into our lives and tell us what they're seeing, where they are, what their experiences are, wouldn't that be something? Yeah. You know, that story's got some history in it, obviously. She cares for her, the little girl. The little girl obviously cares for grandma. Those stories for the little girl need to be told. When we share our stories, this is how we keep, not just keeping the memory alive, but how we validate who they were and how they affected us. When we speak out and tell somebody about the story, it's going out of our mouth, but it's coming right back into our ears. So we're processing. We're giving ourselves some truth serum, if you will, coming back at us, and we start to realize the importance of the relationship. And the stories, we want to hear the stories. Often it's a matter of giving our friends, the ones closest to us, that permission. I want to hear about, what do you know about him? What do you know about her? Tell me how did you experience that? And to gather those stories in is a blessing, right? To hear the stories. But our friends, sometimes, they don't know what to do. They come up to us and then, they know you experience a loss, and they don't want to stir up. They don't want to stir up. They don't want to remind you of the great loss, the traumatic. It's natural. It's a natural thing. So what you do is give them permission. You got to be ready for it, of course. Of course, it's your timing. The timing is under your control, always, on all of these points. But you give them permission to share the stories, and then you'll notice something else start to happen, of course. Memories start to... If I found anything in hospice, it was this. After somebody passes, the tough stuff, you tend to forget it in about 2 years. The bad stuff, if you will. And we want to remember the good stuff. And we do. I remember nothing but good about my grandparents. It was a tough trip. And my dad went through a very tough time, really tough times. Towards the end, medically, it got really complicated. A rough ride, we call it, right? But now the memory is, I love him. He's a great man. A lovely man. And my mom. And my sister. So the memories start to come back, but we need to hear the stories then, too. Your friends will tell you great memories of things you don't know. And it just kind of fleshes them out a little bit better, doesn't it? Moving into recovery timing. That is a piece that the friends, you've heard the old saying, pick yourself up by the bootstraps and get moving. 2 years is enough. 1 year is enough. Or whatever it is, depending on everything, right? And that is, it's, from a counseling standpoint, that's totally inappropriate. It's not asking you how you're doing. It's not inquiring about how you feel today, or how you're processing anything these days. You're getting up and, the usual things you want to hear about. But it would be my discomfort asking you to, aren't you done yet? Aren't you done yet? Come on, let's get back to life. You got to give those people just kind of a little grace and just say, okay, that's the normal thing I expect to hear from you. But it's not helpful, right? Recovery and time. Building a life, I love this line. Building a life without the loved person who just died cannot be expected to be quick, or easy, or straightforward. Life cannot and should not continue as normal. Interesting, right? Talking about change. Being resilient to change. In a sense, a new life has to be created and lived with. After the loss of someone, with whom life has been lived and loved, nothing can be the same. There is a sanity to grief. There is a sanity to it. We have to move ahead just without that individual. Most individuals will recover adequately within a year after the loss. However, some experience extension of a standard grieving process, complicated grief or prolonged grief, and its results from a failure to transition from acute to integrated. Acute, the trauma of the event, of which younger people have a tougher time, but recover quicker, and us older ones don't get grounded as hard, because we've seen a lot of life. It takes longer to recover. Isn't that interesting? The younger ones, it's deeper, but it's faster recovery. And it's transitioning from the acute, from the event or the memory of whatever it is, into a integrated process, where it's integrated back into my life. Integrated back into my life. My brothers and sisters and I share that we're orphans. That's the truth. We have fun with it now. It wasn't fun the first couple of years. The timing is always as our hearts are allowed. As our hearts are allowed. If you love deep, you're going to hurt deep, right? You hear that. So this dual process, this dual model is considered, again, another normative piece where you will move into a sense of wholeness, integrated life again. It's working. You're back to doing the old things you used to do. And then someone will slide in, you'll go right back to grieving and not be able to get out of bed. And it's the kind of a normal process that becomes less over time. When we call it the dual model process, it's because it's exactly that. It's not a forever sentence. It's a process. All of this stuff is a process. If you move through it, it will move on. If you move through it, you'll integrate. If you find yourself blocked, and that's we'll get into that in a second. I've got it on the sheet here, just kind of how to self-check, a little bit of self-checking. If you find yourself in a blocked situation, that's where these kinds of groups, you're here tonight, but there's a lot of people out there that aren't, right? Our planet loses 138,000 individuals daily. St. Peter's Gate is really busy. 30 million annually. You folks are dealing with, or looking at your grief, and that's a good thing. This is what the process, that what they say is the best way to model through this. So the dual process of coming and going in and out of our grief is normal, and as we move through it, it ratchets us back into an integrated life. When grievers vacillate towards restoration-oriented coping, big terms here, the coping strategy they use will enable them to begin making a new life without the deceased, which might involve taking on tasks that were previously carried out by the deceased, such as paying bills and housework, engaging in new activities, or forming new relationships with others. That will happen, obviously, naturally. Over in Portugal, they have what's called death cafes. I don't know if you've heard this or not, but they are cafes for just exactly this kind of arrangement. So you don't have to wait for 7:30 on Wednesday night or Thursday night. You can go there anytime, and you'll find somebody there. And it's just in Portugal, it's just working out. So they're popular, and people visit those and kind of get on with life again, if you will, and process through these things. It's in Portugal. It's interesting. It fosters compassionate communities, and people become friends there. We talk about six methods. Let's see. Time is not straightforward. Life cannot continue as normal. Nothing will be the same again. There's a sanity of grief. Sorry, that's what's on that screen. I'm kind of passing through those. I believe a lot of you can't read these things. Giving friends permission, we talked about that a little bit. This is, again, it should be on your sheet, but I love this one. I thought of you today, but that's nothing new. I thought about you yesterday, and the days before that too. I think of you in silence. I often speak your name. I'll have our memories and your picture in frame. Your memory is my keepsake with which I'll never part. God has you in his keeping. I have you in my heart. When we talk about coping, we have to identify a number of areas in life. And any one of these areas could be in need of attention or a strength for you. If it's a strength for you, you want to kind of make sure you're using it to get through this time period until your grief has been integrated back into life. So these categories they talk about are physical, interpersonal, your friends, emotional. That's a big one, especially for guys. Cognitive, paying attention to reading, studying, whatever. Behavioral, your behaviors. Have they changed? Are they changing? Do they need change? And your spiritual life. And all of these things can be a positive, and they can also be a challenge. In spiritual sense, some folks can find great comfort and solace in the Word of God, in God's love, in the reality of God in our world, taking care of us in our life. Some people are quite challenged by it. How could God let my daughter die? How could a loving God allow, you've heard these arguments before. So it's a challenge to look at those things and kind of figure them out, to walk through it, is to get back to God in this case and say, where does it say in the Bible that God wants me destroyed or my family destroyed or my daughter destroyed? Where does it say that? It doesn't. And so we challenge our faulty thinking with truth. And the truth will, set you free? God's truth. But that doesn't take away from the acute reality that my daughter is now gone. But it's not God. Our physicality. It's not unusual for somebody to just lose their ability to get up and go out and take care of themselves, and do healthy living, right? And that's something that needs to be looked at, and it can be a strength for some. I've got a friend who loves to run. And after his dad died, he just turned it into a time for him to remember his father, and he used that physicality that he had, he was a runner, to get out there more and to just run and process as he's going around town running. It became a strength for him. But it can also be the deficit, right? The person who doesn't get out. I've got a friend who likes, he's 81, friend of mine, one of my prayer buddies. What his ministry is in life is he likes to just show up at somebody's house and visit. So he won't call him, he'll just drop in. So if he was your friend, you just show up and knock on the door. And he was telling me last week about a guy they stopped into, and the fellow was a guy, I can't remember his name, wasn't important, sitting in a chair, didn't let him in, the door was open, and he couldn't talk. And he had been sitting staring at the ground for who knows how long. You see, it was unshaven, unkept. It was, I don't say it's a guy thing, it's not. The guy was just totally physically compromised. He's not been taking care of himself. So that's not a strength for him, and he needs to, my friend is going to be trying to take him out for coffee and get him going again. That's what communities do, right? The body of Christ. Interpersonal, sometimes our relationships, again, will suffer, and that's not, it's the event, it's the situation. I've got friends who couldn't talk to me about my mom. Or my sister. My sister, I loved her dearly. She was 1 year younger than me. She and I were pillow buddies. We grew up, took care of her, she took care of me. She died when she was 65. But my friends couldn't talk to me about her. So interpersonally, it wasn't on strength for me. I couldn't get stories about her. I couldn't share my love about her with my friends. That was a block. Does that make sense? If I could have been able to have stories with and shared in a setting maybe like this, I could have processed my loss of my sister a little bit better. It was not a strength for me. Emotional. That was an easy one to understand. Right? If you love deep, you hurt deep. Folks who have been married I've been married 46 years, probably some of you were longer than that. I always envision like two vines on a fence. The roots get tangled together. How do you take one out? It seems to be a real challenge. You're going to love deep, you're going to hurt deep. So it's an emotional challenge then. But living through it is integrating it. Living through it is to say, I can cry about that, that's okay. It's sad, but I'll be okay. I can cry about it. I can share my fear of, not having my sister anymore. I can cry about it. We can be sad about these things and not be debilitated and not be considered weak. Again, my grandpa was German. Sure up. His son died when he was 40. One of his kids tragically. And I don't think my gramps could show any emotion at all. Because he had to be tough for the family. It's a big family. However, I don't want to judge my grandpa, but I would say that's probably a bit of a block for him. He couldn't integrate that loss. Probably never did, really. I had good friends who had been, at that point, married 45 years. Their son died when he was 23, so it was 25 years prior, I believe. And they're a lovely couple, doing well. And we were talking, I didn't know that their son I didn't know that particular son died. And they were telling me that. They both started crying. And they were my teachers that day. They had integrated their loss. They were living beautiful lives. Outreach was great, healthy, friendly. But their son was their son. And he died too early, too young. And they both cried. And they both could cry, but they shared in the crying. And then I learned something about my friends. I didn't know their voice. I couldn't share anything back with them. But I thanked them for being vulnerable and being available. And he was German. Yeah. So about 50% of us, the way we've got this listed right now, 50% of us respond, we demonstrate ability, we move through and adapt and continue with the loss. About 50% of us move through this phase of life. It's just a difficult one, but we move through it. Less than 50% then have extended time, maybe extended time, years sometimes. And then again, I said it was about 12 to 15% have what's called complicated grief. And then about 1 to 2% have a critical thing. It's usually having to do with other dual diagnoses, other things going on in life. And grief shows up at the wrong time. And it exacerbates their current illness, whatever's going on. It's about 2%, which is not a lot. When acute grief follows in this nature, it's what we call an adaptive process. Keyword process. Adaptive, describing what it is. It's adapting. We are moving into a new reality. We are adapting with this acute grief. We're not forgetting about it, we're just moving with it. It's generally followed by integrated grief, as we've been talking about. We begin to incorporate the loss into our life. We begin to create a new narrative in pursuit of restoring our healthy movement towards living without the deceased in our life anymore. This healthy narrative is really important as we talk about if you were to write these things down on a daily basis, so like a diary, if you will, as you're moving through this process. It's very helpful because you can turn back in a couple of months and see the progress you've made. You would say, oh, I'm in a process. Of course I am. Look, I couldn't do this then. I'm doing this now. I'm kind of moving. There's trajectory towards getting back to living full again. Writing things down, keeping track of your progress. Folks who believe that they might have been blocked, you can self-assess, and that little brief, it's the full sheet. I know these came out earlier, I was going to wait till later. It's called a brief grief questionnaire, appropriate. And it just says if you score 4 or more, it suggests that the individual may have, keyword there is may have complicated grief. And if you do, it's a referral off to a grief specialist. So, if this was given to me directly after my sister died, I would have been 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I was a mess. I was a terrible mess. But I wasn't blocked, or I don't think I was. I moved through this process, and grief became integrated. And I love my sister, and I can talk about her, and her 2 children are beautiful, and we can talk about her as well. But had I been blocked, it would show up in this. So you can do a quick self-inventory with utilizing that. The other side, the flip side of that same piece of paper. These are where the strengths are identified. And these are helpful in the sense that it asks me if I have done anything, or am trying to do anything, or have experienced anything. Some of the things we know that help in coping, if you will. We've talked about these first. These are the areas that we're always concerned about: cognitive, behavioral, emotional, social, spiritual, physical, interpersonal. Right? We talked a little bit about the dual process model, which is that coming and going that actually builds. Continuing bond this is a new process that's for resiliency. You, in the years past, we always say kind of separate yourself from the memory. And this is not that. This is contrary. This is saying the memory is good. It's what do you do with that memory? So there's no need to try to forget about that person or that job or whatever it was that is the subject of your loss. Continuing bond is a healthy thing. Making meaning making, is this narrative where we rewrite the story of our life, but we write it with our history included. We rewrite the story of our life. So narrative, saying and writing down and publishing, if you will, who we are and what we are, is a healthy process at this time. Because at this time, we're getting swept around with emotions. At this time, we've got friends who won't talk to us about our loss. At this time, things can be really upheaval and turned around. If you start to take the process and start narrating, who am I? What am I doing? Who do I love? What do I love? Who loves me? What do I like? What do I do in life? What's the meaning of life? How do I see God? How's my physicality? Am I paying attention to my brains? That's what that back sheet is all about. Asking yourself those questions about your health, but then narrating. It's narrative therapy for other things, but this is just narrating your new life, as you will, going forward. Not being trapped with history. Then the other thing they point out, of course, is self-help. You can get these through books, doing things like we're doing now, conference work, consulting, and getting self-help is very appropriate and does work. Bibliotherapy is just books. Just doing reading. Sorry about that word. And then I did mention the death cafes that they're doing over in Portugal right now. I don't know if they'll ever catch on here. In hospice, we had a, it's kind of a tricky subject because in hospice we had two nurses that I knew, they were on Egan, and they created a new business. And they called themselves death doulas. Okay? Death doulas. There's a thing in hospice where you step into hospice or bring them into your life. They bring a lot of cares with them and a lot of awarenesses and they can really walk the family through the process. But you don't want to go through that too many times in life. So normally, once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times in your life, you'll have to deal with that reality. And so a birth doula, is the same thing. If you're in a birthing room and a birth doula helps the mother deliver the child, it's a process that she couldn't do on her own. Her husband, for sure, unless he was a doctor. So the doula is there for that purpose. And these death cafes kind of fall into the same thing. It's kind of like, what? What kind of word is that? That's never going to fly. But they're hopefully going to catch on in other places too. So narrating your next piece of life is adapting to a new way of life. A couple of things that just popped up for me. These are things that I've known are proven that work. Volunteering. You don't have to volunteer all the time and everywhere, but if you can move into, if you haven't done it at all, move out and start volunteering somewhere. Help somebody. When you go home at the end of the day and you have to reflect on that and you're praying about it, you're going to go, I helped somebody else. It pivots the heart. The heart will pivot a little bit because you're being the hands and the feet of Jesus, doing the Beatitudes, helping the poor, clothing the naked, whatever it is, feeding the hungry. Volunteering, nursing home visiting. There's people that are needed in jails. There's people that don't know how to read, so we can go there and teach people. This is really rewarding. Doing something of meaning, recreating, creation, as opposed to if the death or the loss is a destruction or a lessening in our life. The creative work is to add to life, add to the planet, add to the color out there, to the music, add something, is to create. It's healthy, it's therapeutic for the heart. To sit at the end of the day and go, I created that song. I write music a lot. I created that song. Nobody's ever heard it before. It's brand new. But that's therapeutic. It really helps reestablish who I am. Seeking help. If you believe that this complicated grief might be possibly part of your reality right now, and the only reason I'm bringing it up is because it's so important. If you do have it, that you attend to it. Or if you know somebody out there that's got complicated grief, that's stuck in grief. I had a fellow, when I was at one of my assignments, I knew him for years. He called me up one day and said, Joe, you got to come to the house because I've got a problem. And so I went to the house, and what it was is he had his mother in an urn on the buffet in the living room. And he was in charge of the household, and there was younger people that lived there too. And he said the kids would come through that room and they wouldn't respect mom. And I think it had been this way for 10 years. And their kids were getting unruly, his younger brothers and sisters and their friends. They wouldn't, what he wanted is everybody to be quiet in the house. And when you walk through that room, you just tippy-toe kind of through that space. And then you can play in the other room. Well, my friend had kind of got in trouble with this. He got blocked. He got stopped somewhere in this grieving process. That was his mother. It was very important. But he was the one who needed to be moved a little bit. his brothers and sisters were actually helping him to see what the problem was, that he needed some awareness in that area. So if you think you've got something like that going on, it's good to seek some extra attention, extra help with that. I've got another friend, I still group with him on a weekly basis. We pray together all the time. And he's a good friend of mine. And his wife of 23 years, she passed on. She's been gone for 23 years. Now I've been with this guy for a number of years, and he's had women that want to date him. It's not happening. And his wife is still at the house. Now she's not on buffet, but she's in the closet, I think. My friend is kind of blocked. He needs to move through that. Timing is everything. 23 years, right? That's a little bit long. But I'm being very cautious as I approach him on that topic, because it is his wife. He has fond memories of her. So these pieces on the back side are just things for you for thought. If you can write them down, take a look at them, you'll probably see a composite of who you are at the moment. It's a snapshot. These things always change. I think, yes. Thank you for being so patient and listening. I've got a closing prayer, if we can do it together. And then I guess we have time for questions. If not, I don't want to take time from your grouping together. On the back side of your, it's called a call to worship. If I read the regular form, and you could read the bold, that would be great. Sustaining God, as we come to this place, we bring with us our own unique experiences and emotions. Collectively, we cry out, we who are weary and we who are hopeful, we rejoice and we mourn. We who have felt sustained by your hand, and we who are wondering where you are. We who are anxious and we who are calm. We who are peaceful and we who are angry. We who feel nothing and we who feel everything. We who are certain and we who are filled with doubt. And we who are everything in between. May we who have gathered tonight bring all that we are and all that we have experienced. Feel sustained by your love and the care of this family of faith. May we remember this moment as sacred as we bring our doubts, our grief, our joys, and our hopes before you and one another. Amen. Good prayer to start your group with. I have just a little blessing. It's a little bit more interactive. Just hold your hands in cup shape like this, if you will. And I'll just read this. Cup your hands together, and you will see the shape. This blessing wants to take a bowl, a basket, a vessel. It cannot help but hold itself open to welcome what comes. This blessing knows the secret of the fragments that find their way into its keeping. The wholeness that may hide in what they have left behind. The persistence of plenty where there seemed only lack. Look into the hollow of your own hands and ask what wants to be gathered there. What abundance awaits among the scraps that come to you. What feast will offer itself from the pieces that remain. Beautiful blessing. Be blessed. Okay, that is the end of that. So if we have time for any questions? Yes.
I'm a love hard And I've been widowed twice, at 43 and at 53, so I'm less optimistic than I used to be and more scared. So I have trouble with the autumn metaphor because they left before their time. And now I worry about my parents because they're pushing 80.
Still alive.
Yeah, and good people, so I love them too, and my dad is really.
And your dad, John. Thanks for sharing that. Others? Yes?
While you were speaking, I was formulating this question, and then I think you sort of answered it as I was writing, and I might have missed some. But it was when you were talking about the 2%. I was wondering if there's individuals identified, or maybe a type of person that never integrates, or like a nature-nurture thing that sets somebody up to not recover.
Yes.
Really?
Yes. And that's that 2%.
And it kind of sounded like they're like, it's diagnoses.
Yeah, the dual diagnosis. If somebody steps into acute grief, bereavement, and they're already in a depressive episode, that can shove them down into almost, it's a very tough thing to recover from, where they could need some special help, special attention, more time, a more therapeutic approach. Depression, it's usually the depression in the DSM-5, that's usually where all this stuff with bereavement is tagged in, is on the tails of a chronic depression. Right? It could be bipolar, the type 2, the deep depressions of that. It could also be just depressive episodes. Yeah.
So like when it happens, they're depressed already, you mean?
Right. They're starting off.
That's kind of resonating, but
It's a normal world, well, whatever normal is, it's a setting of a dryer. But say this is where everybody's at. And they're starting here already. And then, yeah. So, you gotta watch for suicidal ideation. Those things start to come in. If it's not already there, it's gonna be exasperated. And kind of critical to be really close to somebody when they're in that situation and get them in for help. Sure.
yes.
Yeah. Most of everybody else will pass through it, even though it seems ridiculously deep and hard. And it is. We're not designed to go through this. We're designed to live and have fun and have life. So passing through this time is a learning experience to integrate a new piece of life, which is death. We're all gonna go there, right? I have this beautiful vision of, because I've worked in hospice for so many years. What if, this is the life according to Job, what if, because your mom and dad were on this planet when God allowed you in, your parents were the ones that God said, yeah, I'm going to send him, her to you, and you can welcome them in, and you take care of them, you raise them. Beautiful, right? Now your parents, mine they're already passed. They're in heaven, I'm sure. Wouldn't it be just like God to allow my mom and dad to be standing at the door when I come in? I think it's a beautiful.
I think that's funny that you said that because my sister passed away on August 6th, 2019, and I was the only family member that was there by her bedside. I consider my biggest blessing that I was able to be there and she wasn't alone. And as the nurse was walking me back to the waiting room, I said, oh my gosh. And she said, what? I said, it's my parents' wedding anniversary. So I did envision one of my parents.
Yeah. They're already there, right? They're already there. Nothing can separate you from the love of Christ. Nothing above, on the earth, or below the earth. God already has you. If you're baptized into his family of love, you kind of know where you're going. That's really want to mess up. You already kind of know where you're going. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Any questions? I have questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deacon Joe. Next week, our program is Holiday Heartaches with Linda Lehman, who's a psychologist. She'll be talking about things related to the holidays and how you can cope and plan to get through the holidays. Okay, our groups tonight, we have several facilitators who couldn't be here tonight, so some of the facilitators are different. For loss of spouse, Cheryl Drone will be down in the music room, which is down in the second level. Jack Anderson, your group will be down there too. Those are both for loss of spouse. Loss of child will be room number 9, which is also downstairs with Nancy Matheson. Loss of parent with Darlene Forgey will be upstairs in the fireside room, which is off to the side here. Loss of sibling or friend with Sue Thompson will also be in the library, which is at the end of the hall over here. Suicide survivors with Dan Nauman in the sanctuary. Do you sit back there or up here? Up here, okay. And we did not have enough facilitators for me to do a separate group for separated or divorce and transitional loss. I will try to do that group myself, and we'll meet outside by where registration was tonight for transitional, and separated or divorced can join us. Anybody have questions about where you need to go? If not, be knowing that you're adjourning your groups by 9 p.m.
And there are refreshments out in the foyer.
Yes, treats.